Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. It is great to see everybody. I want to welcome you to our breakout session, a case study approach to equitable assessment and identification of gifted, presented by Marianne Clark. Marianne Clark is the coordinator for gifted instruction in Gadsden ISD. She previously retired as the El Paso ISD Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. Her past experiences include Director for Advanced Academic Services, Instructional Facilitator, and Gifted Education Teacher. She is the current president of the South Central affiliate of the New Mexico Association for the Gifted. Thank you so much for joining us, Marianne. Before I turn it over to you, I just want to let participants know, if you have any questions, please feel free to post those in the chat. Marianne's team is going to be monitoring chat as well. Sometimes if it's something they can answer right away, they will. Or if they need more information from Marianne, they'll go ahead and interrupt. So feel free to post your questions as they come up. Marianne is going to share resources with NMAG following this. So I know that question comes up every one of these sessions because we're getting so much great information. So yes, those will be shared and they will be posted for participants following the Institute. All right, Marianne, welcome and take it away.
Good morning. Thank you all for giving us this opportunity to share this exciting project that we've embarked on at Gadsden ISD. Before I even get started, I just want to introduce some of the people from our district that have joined us. We have with us Leslie Harris, who is an instructional specialist for special education in Gadsden. Shauna Wilson is also an instructional specialist, as is Humberto Diaz and Lisa Aguilar. They all have different roles as specialists in our district, but all four of them are working with gifted. 3 of the 4 have been on our district advisory committee now for the past 4 to 5 years. Also with us is Andres Melendez, who is our guru and our parent advocate from Gadsden ISD. And so I just want you all to know that everyone from Gadsden will be trying to answer your questions in the chat as we go. But if there's something that they think we need to discuss openly or they want more information on, they'll interrupt and we'll stop and we'll talk about whatever your question is. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. Can everyone see that? Do I have that correctly on the screen? Okay, good. All right, so here's our contact information. If any of you wants further questions, if you want access to some of our resources, we're sharing everything. I'm a true believer, and I heard it in several of the sessions yesterday, repeatedly, that in the field of education, those of us that are in education, we do everything because we have such a passion for it. And so we openly share our resources and we gladly let you have access to anything we have. So I just wanted you all to know that right from the start. Okay, we're going to talk about several things today. I've already well deep into the introduction, but we're going to talk about some components to our case study approach. And that really has to do with how we actually have reconfigured our approach in our district. And so after we go through the background of how we came to this approach, we're going to talk about a group called our gifted assistant teams that we now have at our elementary schools. So we have it at 16 elementary schools. We're going to go through our gifted referral timeline because we found part of the problem with gifted is because we don't have those federal mandates holding us accountable for gifted like we do for children with disabilities. Gifted often gets pushed to the side, it gets pushed back. And then we're actually going to go into an overview of what the case study approach is, and we're hoping to have some times for question and answer. One of the things my team's going to do is if they have anything to add, if I've forgotten something, we're really good at presenting together and they'll just kind of jump in and add to it to give you a more in-depth look at whatever we're discussing. So let's start with an introduction to the case study approach and how we got to where we are today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of our project. And one of the things we did as a district, when I was hired, I've started my 6th year. So when I was hired my first year, I was hired as the instructional specialist for gifted and for inclusion. And one of the things I discovered as I got into learning the district, learning the New Mexico law, because I came from Texas, one of the things I found out was that in our district, we didn't have a real cohesive approach to gifted. Different people would be assigned it off and on throughout time, but there was no cohesive approach to it. And another thing that had lagged is the district hadn't been utilizing the district gifted advisory committee. And so the first thing I did was get permission and find out who the stakeholders were. And my first task was to identify who our gifted advisory committee would be and invite the participants and start to have those meetings. So we ended up with a very broad group in our advisory committee, and I'll talk about that later. Some of the things that I identified and that members of our team identified when we first met that we really saw a need for in Gadsden is we know we needed to identify more students for services. Gadsden is high poverty. Every single school is Title I. It's a Title I district. I believe over 86, 87% of our kids are low socioeconomic. The second thing we needed to do was ascertain what the gifted student needs actually were. One of the things that confuses people about gifted, and in Gadsden we see it a lot because we have a lot of people that work in Texas and come to New Mexico and New Mexico to Texas, and both states have different models. And the one thing I discovered right off that I really love about New Mexico that Texas doesn't have is in the law, it says you can't only just identify someone as gifted, you have to show that they have a need for services, which is really different because in Texas, you just identify in areas of giftedness and then you have programs. So actually, New Mexico does a better job of serving and looking at the individual child. And one of the things I noticed is many people in our district, because of a lack of training for many reasons, really didn't even understand what those students' needs were when they were gifted. And so that was a problem. We also found out that we really needed to improve communication. I think that's a problem in general. I will say that one of the good things from this COVID nightmare has been, I think, communication's better. With the Zoom, with the Google, with all of these different ways to touch base, I'm actually getting access to more people interacting more rather than less. So that's a good thing. We also found out that for gifted, nobody really followed any set evaluation timelines. In the TAM, it says it's up to the district to set the evaluation timelines for gifted, but our district had just casually decided, well, it will be more or less whatever the timeline is for our disabled students. There was no set timeline for gifted. And finally, we noticed that there was a huge need for professional development. See why I can't, there it goes. Okay. So one of the first things we did is when we came together, we were looking at the problem from two different groups of people. First group of people, which is our most powerful asset, is our gifted district, our district gifted advisory committee. We have on it 3 high school principals, we have middle school principals, we have elementary principals, we have teachers, we have parents, we have students, we have different members of central office and also members of the special education department. In all, we have about 46 people on our advisory. We have 3 distinct kind of cluster or feeder patterns in our district. All 3 patterns are equally represented. So we have people from the Gadsden High School feeders, from the Santa Teresa High School feeders, and from the Chaparral High School feeders. One of the things we did as we became a committee, we have a very structured meeting format. I simply facilitate. Mr. Melendez has been acting as our committee chair, and every year when we restart our committee, everyone has a role. My role is to facilitate, bring resources, bring information, keep us moving forward, make sure that we're going in a good direction. As a committee, we did several things. Over the past 5 years, we've gathered a lot of data and studied patterns and percentages and looked at exactly what do we have happening out there. And we've been brutally honest. One of the things you have just upfront and honest. It takes time to improve. It takes time to make a change, and you have to do it by being upfront. We've analyzed and synthesized information from both the TAM and other sources such as National Gifted Association, the different places like at the University of Connecticut, Davidson's Davidson Institute, etc. We've provided feedback to the special education department and to district administration about the data we've collected, about all of the things that we have. And then when we finally came up with our proposal as a group, we then again took it to the special education department. They worked on it, and then we gave the final proposal a push forward back to the special education department to see where we would be. As a department, as a special education department, our role has been to gather information from other districts. Oh, I didn't mean for that to do that. Let me go to previous. I'm learning how to operate on this. We collected feedback not only from our schools, we collected feedback. One of the things I did when I became instructional specialist for gifted, and now I'm the gifted coordinator, which we've never had a gifted coordinator before, so that's good. One of the things that we did, that I've done, is I started 5 years ago, a summer institute. We have a part 1 for beginners. It's 4 days, 6 hours a day. A part 2 for intermediate, and a part 3, which we call our level 3 institute, which is topics in gifted education. So during those summer institutes that were very generously funded from our Title II coordinator, our Title II executive director, is during those institutes, because we had high numbers of teachers attending, we were able to pay them a stipend. We were able to collect a lot of feedback from the people that are actually on the ground doing the job, in addition to where my specialists and I have collected feedback when we're in the schools. We've also, as a department, researched best practices and brought them forward to our district advisory committee. And within our department, we formed collaborative work groups. Those work groups included people from the district advisory and people from the special ed department who worked together and finally drafted and presented our proposal. One other thing I want to say is, also on our gifted advisory, we also have a school board member. So we don't want to forget our school board member, Ms. Rodriguez. So those are the steps we took to get to where we are, because it needs to be community embraced, it needs to be grassroots led, but people don't know what they need because they don't know what they're missing and they don't know what's out there. So that's what I was doing as the facilitator of the group. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, once we presented it, once we had our proposal, we sent that to the PED, and Ms. Costales and the folks at the PED went through it. They went through it a lot. We had several discussions, and they gave us a green light to move forward with our proposal. So I'm going to go into the proposal through several lenses, which is going to be a little different way to do it. The most critical thing to the proposal was that every school that's implementing this, and we're just in our very initial implementation. We started last year in February, COVID came in, and we are not moving as quickly as we would want, to be honest, but we're still moving forward. So every elementary school had the opportunity, and we have, I think, 17 elementaries. Of the 17, 16 of them have already formed their gifted assistant teams. And every school, what we did is we said, okay, previously with gifted, in our proposal, because we know identification is low, because we know that that we're serving less than 2% right now of our population is gifted. We know that over 80% are socioeconomic disadvantaged. We know that over 90% are Hispanic. We're not identifying those groups that really are in critical need, that are really at risk. So one of the things we decided was we are going to take gifted out of our student assistant team's hands, which is now our multi-level layers of levels of system support. We're taking them out of that hands, and we're going to actually create a team that's whole focus is looking at gifted. So we formed what we call gifted assistant teams, and we now have them at the elementary level. Our gifted assistant teams are serving as a student assistant team, but only for gifted. One of the things we saw with our student assistant teams, especially since we have a lot of EL students, we have a lot of economically disadvantaged, is they were overwhelmed in their teams with doing SAT process for disabilities. And many of the teams did not really understand RTI for gifted, didn't really understand what they were looking for. And all of our kids were just fast tracked to FTAP. So we weren't doing a lot of looking at the students. We were just, if we had a referral, FTAP. Does that make sense to everyone? And so what we thought is, no, we need to be more scouting out and really looking at the children in our schools. What do we have here? What can our kids do? So we put the gifted assistant teams for every school, and they serve as a student assistant team. So now they are taking over the whole referral process for gifted, and they are also responsible for all of the initial gifted determinations. So when we have an initial gifted determination, all of the members of the GAT will serve on the IEP also, okay? These members work very closely with our gifted coordinator, who is myself. Our GAT teams are responsible for obtaining informed written parental consent once a referral is recommended. They receive initial as well as ongoing professional development. Some of the topics include the nature and needs of gifted learners, the new evaluation process, and writing IEP for gifted learners. We started out with our first team with a 5-day training. It was very intense. They discovered, because we had so many levels of expertise, that they decided we really needed to make it longer. It turned into a 7-day intensive training. They will guide and support students who will be submitting portfolios. They will also be the ones they are also the ones who evaluate portfolio assessments. They support our IEP teams with our annual IEPs and gifted evaluations. And they also become a resource to support our teachers who work with gifted learners. In our district, when I came in, we had very few people that actually have a gifted endorsement or gifted certification. We had very few people to provide support on our 22, 21 campuses for our gifted learners. And now we have someone on each of these campuses, a group of people to provide support to the teachers. So that's a good thing. Our gifted assistant teams have a leader, and the leader is called the Gifted Assistant Team Liaison. And the Gifted Assistant Liaison, this is someone that the campus administrator chooses to lead the team, functions in 2 roles. They are the case manager for all of the initial evaluations, and they are the facilitator for the gifted assistant team. So they have 2 roles that they have to follow. As a case manager, they have several things they have to do. They have to initiate and oversee the entire referral process. They have to ensure that everyone is adhering to timelines. They set up and notify all of the GAP members of meetings, of the case study, analysis, and discussion times. They gather input and data for drafting the initial IEP. They arrange and set out notices for eligibility determination and IEP team meetings. They initiate and oversee the portfolio assessment process, including scoring for students recommended by the eligibility determination team, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. They disseminate IEP information and collaborate with general education teachers and other service providers. And they verify that IEP services are being carried out and implemented in compliance with state and district regulations. Now, this one's really important. One of the things I found out when I first came into the district, and I literally in my first year went over every IEP for every gifted student in our district. One of the things that I found out was all of the kids had IEPs, but nobody was really carrying them out. If you didn't have a gifted specialist on the campus with a gifted as a gifted case manager with a gifted endorsement, then literally and if you didn't have an enrichment period on the campus, then literally these kids were almost being ignored. They had an IEP, the goals would get passed out. All the gifted kids seemed to have the same goals, and they really weren't doing much for the kids. So one of the things we thought was really important was for our gifted liaison to verify and make sure everyone understands what you should be doing with that student. The second thing the GAT liaison does is they facilitate the team. They're the one that take all professional development information to the team, as well as to their faculty and staff. If there's something in the surrounding area, if there's something online, anything we find, we filter it to these GAT liaisons and they get it out to the campuses. They serve as the point of contact for teachers who need support. If they have a student who really is bored in class or is having social emotional issues or whatever, these are the folks now that are going to provide first stop support. If they can't support them, then they immediately contact me and I know where to get the support. They also seek guidance from our GAT liaisons. They're the ones that also help with the annual IEP development and gifted reevaluations. We found that both of those areas are in dire need of support. They work with and schedule support with me, And they also facilitate all of the GAT team meetings. So they have a lot of responsibilities. What's really interesting is our GAT liaisons don't get a stipend. They don't get extra time. I cannot tell you how hard these people work and how enthusiastic they are and how dedicated they are, because they have bought into it through the training and they know it's important and they know the meaning of it. So it's a really good thing. So here's an example of, or a poster, and we actually have this in poster form. Every document I'm sharing with you is something that we have created for our GAT teams that they actually have access to. These are actually large posters that they have, and I don't know how well you can see it, but it actually shows our referral process and what happens. So we begin with the teacher, the parent, or the administrator who initiates the referral. It immediately goes to the GAT liaison, who is the case manager. And the GAT liaison then disseminates and collects all the referral documents. And we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the things we've done as a team is we've retooled all documents we're using, and I'll share some examples of those in a while. The GAT liaison then contacts and meets with the parents to do two things: to obtain informed written consent for the process and to have the parent complete a parent screener. So our liaison is in charge of that. And when we have our training, our liaisons actually practice that. The instructional specialists role played the parents, and our liaisons actually practice how we do these kinds of things. The GAT then meets to review and discuss the completed referral packet, the kinds of data that will provide clarity insight about the student. So as a team, they're going to meet and look at the referral packet. When they look at the referral packet, they're then going to diagnose, and they are going to then talk to the diagnostician about the student. This is what we have. This is what we know. This child, for example, is an English learner. We want to make sure we're giving them the most appropriate kind of assessment for that, those kinds of things. And we'll get deeper into it later. The GAT liaison then gives the diagnostician the completed referral packet and obtains informed written consent for the evaluation, and our 60-day timeline begins to complete the assessment. Prior to this, we had kids that sometimes who were gifted that were waiting up to 2 years to be assessed for gifted. Not good. The diagnostician and the team work together, and then the diagnostician chooses and administers the assessment instruments and writes an evaluation report. The GAT then meets to discuss and analyze the case study data, including the DIAG's completed evaluation report. Now, this is an actual step, and I'm going to go through it in a minute, that's actually very detailed, and it involves a lot of data in addition to whatever the DIAG has, okay? And here we now have a 30-day timeline that goes into effect to present the results, okay? At this point, after 30 days, the gifted eligibility determination team meets. So we have our IEP, and one of three things can happen. The first thing is the team concludes there is sufficient evidence of highly superior indicators of giftedness and demonstration of educational need as set by NMPED. In that case, the child has already been identified for service. Or the team might decide that the student has evidence of highly superior indicators of gifted, but don't meet the qualifying criteria. If that is the case, then the team requests additional information or evidence, such as a portfolio of student work, and that is noted on the prior written notice. The 30-day timeline then begins to support the portfolio. When we get to that part, the GAT liaison then provides guidance to the parent, the teacher, and the student on how to put the portfolio together. Now that's super important. We have a day of training just on how to do that, okay? And then once they have that, a 15-day timeline begins to present the results. So once the portfolio has been turned in, a 15-day timeline begins, and then the GAT then convenes to evaluate the portfolio, and then with the eligibility team, they have a meeting, and the team makes the recommendation. Yes, they're gifted, or no, they are not. The other thing that can happen is the team can conclude that the student does not demonstrate sufficient evidence of highly superior indicators of giftedness and does not meet the qualifying criteria set by the PED. So that is the what actually happens in the whole process. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm kind of talking blind. I'm used to seeing people's faces, so please forgive me. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the case study actually is, because you saw the timeline, but you really we haven't dug into what are we actually doing with this case study. So we need to understand that a case study has two parts. The first part is the collection of evidence that forms the student profile. One of the things we've talked about to our gifted team is we do not believe that cutoff scores are helpful or productive. So one of the things that our gifted advisory recommended to use the case study, so we're actually looking at each child in relation to their peers on their campus. A child at, let's say, Santa Teresa Elementary School, that campus, which is a full 45-minute drive from our kids, maybe let's say at North Valley or Mesquite Elementary School, that whole community is different and the student population is different. So one of our lenses being very, very local, we're going to be part of our process that we're looking at is actually establishing not just local norms, but campus norms for gifted, because it's always in relation to the peers and what can be achieved on their campus. And we believe very strongly in that. So one of the things is the collection of evidence for the student profile. And the second part is the analysis and the discussion of the case. Both of these things are super, super important. You can't collect a lot of good evidence. That's great. But if you don't know how to analyze it and discuss it and look at it, it's not going to do you any good. So those are the two parts of the case study that we use. Okay. When we look at the actual case study, we're looking at what we call a body of evidence. The body of evidence gives us our entire student profile. And the body of evidence has two parts. We have qualitative evidence, and we've listed some examples there, things like observations, interviews, performance tasks, anecdotal records, rubrics, portfolios, teacher-created assessments, New Mexico inventory for parents of potentially gifted students, tabs, language use surveys. That's just a beginning list. They are not limited. These are examples. We have qualitative evidence. That's numeric. That's empirical. We have lots of different matrices listed. We have things like the RIAS. We have things like state and district mandated assessments, COGAT, Torrance Test of Creative Thinking, the SRB CSS, RAVEN, KABC. Any kind of a quantitative piece of evidence that we can grab, we want that in our hands. And we don't expect to see the same evidence for all kids because every student is individual. So the types of evidence is going to lead to the type of giftedness that we're looking at because we're serving their needs in the areas that the state puts forth. So we're serving them as their overall intellectual ability. We're serving them in their creative, if they're creatively, divergently gifted. We're serving them if they're academically gifted. We could be serving them if they are gifted in critical thinking and problem solving. And so we're looking at all that evidence, and I can tell you the discussions are very long, just how to train to examine it. But when we're doing it, we're actually also looking at the 4 areas of giftedness. Where are they gifted in those 4 areas? The second part with the case study is really important because you have to listen to all the evidence. And this is where the GAT liaison, once all the evidence is in, once we have our student profile, this is when we call for the discussion and the analysis of the case study. So part of that meeting involves the DIAG, who has all of the assessments that he or she has administrated. And then it involves all the other members of the team that have collected a lot of information. And you're going to see the kinds of information here in a bit. And then we actually have forms and processes for how do we meet together to analyze and discuss this case. This is something that our GAT teams have already practiced. Our GAT liaisons in the 7-day training, we have 1 day that we still haven't quite completed, but they've already practiced looking at actual cases from our district of actual students. They've actually gone through this process and practiced it. And the important thing is not to pre-assume anything. They have to listen to absolutely everything before you form an opinion and make a recommendation. You need to look for patterns. You need to look at what you see over time. You cannot look at the child in the context of one snapshot of time. And you also have to look at the child in relation to the peers on that campus in that grade level. Okay? So the referral process, as you can tell, has a definitive timeline. We initiate the referral process. We begin to collect the documents. The timeline hasn't started until that happens. We don't want to start the timeline until we get the informed written consent. That's when our 60-day timeline starts. So when we initiate the process, though, we're still gathering information, but not on the assessments that we're going to give them in addition to whatever is already out there. I think what gifted teams miss out on is they don't imagine, or they don't really think through how much information is out there about each child and what does it tell us. And so one of the things that we're training our committee to do is, what do we mean by data? What do we mean by information? And where can we find it and how can we collect it? And so there's a whole process we have for that. Once we obtain the informed signed written consent, the 60-day timeline starts, begin the process, and then at the end of that 60 days, we make an eligibility determination, or we request a portfolio, evaluate the portfolio, and then make an eligibility determination. And I kind of got tongue-tied on that. So let me take you through this form, because this form is crucial. Whoops. And so I kind of want to take us through. This is part of a checklist that we've given to all of our GAT teams. And this is our gifted case study checklist. And so we have replaced all the documents previously in use. We looked at them, we pulled what we thought was good from them. We got all the information that we thought worked. That was all process of our subcommittees. This took us a couple years to go through. And then we created documents just for our new process. And so all of our GAT teams now follow this checklist. And the first task of our liaison is just to get the basic information, which is the student name, school, date of birth, etc., student ID, and also things that you always need to have, such as their language dominance and proficiency data. Then the checklist begins, and our liaison is responsible for making sure that the team follows this checklist and does everything they're supposed to do. So the first step is to get all of the required documents and data, including to begin getting parent consent. So we have a gifted referral form and gifted indicator checklist that they have to gather. Their most recent vision and hearing screening data, academic assessment data, they're going to put it here. Academic district assessments, they're going to put it here. Current 504 plan or IEP, if they have any of those. We do have several districts. And then documents, reports, or other evidence of giftedness collected from parents. And we list it here. And we go into great detail on the training how to do that. Step 2 is the parent meeting with the GAT liaison. GAT liaison contacts the DIAG and schedules meeting with the parent to obtain parent consent and to present a standalone written notice of proposed action. And that's really, really important. So our liaisons have to talk to the DIAG first to find out when the DIAG is going to be available to start, to start the assessments. Especially now with COVID, we're very behind on evaluations. The GAT liaison then meets with the parent and obtains signed and dated parental consent. The 60-day calendar timeline begins on that date, and that's where they put in the date calendar on the date line, and the 60-day calendar timeline ends. They put it there. They provide the parent with the parent screener. We've created a parent screener that I'll share with you in a minute that we want the parent to fill out. So we have actually several screeners. When a student is referred, whoever refers the student has a referral screener. And that form they fill out. And then the next one is the parent screener, okay? And then the parent screener is added to the student's case file. So that's in step 2. In step 3, the GAT reviews and discusses the gifted referral and gifted indicator checklist. So what they're going to do is they're going to take all the referral information and everything that the GAT liaison has found thus far, and they are going to look at it as a group, as a team. Okay, whoops. So for example, they're going to look at the student self-evaluation. We're having all our kids, even kinder, fill out a student self-evaluation. We have created student questions for the gifted case study, scales for rating behavioral characteristics of superior students, and then critical thinking problem solving assessments that we'll be giving them. Assessments determined by the diagnostician will be what are the critical thinking assessments they're going to use with this child, what creativity assessment are they going to use, what intellectual assessment are they going to use, and what academic assessment. And this is all determined in collaboration with the GAT team. We want the GAT team to be recommending and having that dialogue with the DIAG. This is what we think we're seeing from the evidence thus far. This is the kind of student we have. Is this a student with a learning disability? Is this a student that has speaks a different language? Is this a student from poverty who has high verbal thinking but appears not to be very verbal, etc.? So they're talking about all these kinds of things, and this is all part of the training we give the teachers. And then any other assessment information that the GAT thinks would be helpful, they're going to list here. So that's in step 3. Whoops. Step 4 is our case data analysis and gifted eligibility determination with our IEP meeting. So the diagnostician completes the evaluation report and uploads it into our PowerSchool Special Education. Once that's done, the GAT liaison convenes a case study data analysis meeting. And we actually have forms and a process that we do throughout this meeting to be able to make sure we're doing it right. Once they have that meeting, they make a recommendation, and then they become part of that gifted eligibility determination team when they have the IEP meeting. So they bring that recommendation to the determination team. They're not making the decision, they're just bringing a recommendation of what they've seen with the evidence. And now the full team is meeting. The full team will include the parent, the administrator, the teachers, the current teachers of the student, etc., in addition to our GAT committee. The gifted eligibility determination or IEP meeting is held, and then the student either meets qualifying criteria, does not meet criteria, or they request a portfolio. And if they do, that's part of the written notice of proposed action. If they are requesting a portfolio, that's when we go to step 5. And with the portfolio assessment on part 5, we again, on step 5, the student portfolio is submitted no later than this date. So once they've determined the date on step 4, the date's recorded into step 5. The GAT liaison meets with student and parent to provide guidance through the portfolio process. The student submits the portfolio to the GAT. We have a 15 calendar timeline that begins then. And we are encouraging our students to actually submit them physically, although some students don't want to, and that's fine, but we want them submitting them so that they have a chance to talk to our teams and to get input and answer questions. The GAT schedules the gifted eligibility determination or IEP meeting, and then the gifted eligibility IEP team makes the final determination. So what I would like to do is now go into, and I'm going to just escape from my presentation because I'd like to share some documents with you, if I may. And first of all, are there any questions that we need to ask before I share some of the documents?
Everything that's come up in chat has been answered. So
okay, good, because I'm kind of flying blind. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so one of the things we have in Google is we actually have a drive for our liaisons, and these are documents that we have in the drive. And you can see I've highlighted, and can everyone see this all right? I've highlighted.
Can't. We're still seeing the slideshow.
Okay, so I got to figure out how to get out of the slideshow. Let me see. I'm not familiar with Zoom. Please forgive me. Let me see.
You probably just have to stop sharing and then share a different window.
And share again. Okay. Stop share. Thank you. I'm glad you're with me because I am clearly challenged here with this. I'm really good with Google though. Okay, now I reshare the screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So now I'm going to I hope this is the screen. How do I tell which one is the screen? Must be this one, right? Desktop. Okay. Okay.
Now we're seeing your whole screen. There you go.
Fabulous. Okay. So thank you so much for talking me through it. So as you can see, we have a liaison drive for all of our liaisons, and you can see I have lots of documents. Our documents are in English and Spanish. Down here, this PDF, the referral and assessment process, that's the chart that was in the slideshow. Right here, the gifted case study checklist. That's the checklist that I just shared with you that we went through in parts. I'm going to show you some of the different things we have, and I'm just going to kind of random go through. For instance, we have a gifted referral form and gifted indicator checklist that I shared with you. This is the example of it. They have to fill it out. They put in who they are. Then they put in why are you referring this student? What are some characteristics of gifted you have observed? And then they actually fill out this second sheet. So it has things like the student has an extensive vocabulary. The student seems to know something about a lot of different topics. This looks a little unusual because it came up as a Google, but it's actually a Word document, so it looks better in Word. So that's one thing that we have. Another one, hopefully I'm going, oops, I went to the wrong screen. I apologize. I do that all the time. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and I apologize for doing that. I'm very good at, I'm a very random thinker, and I trip myself up often. People have to keep me in line.
I have students telling me all the time, you're still sharing the same window. We don't know what we're seeing.
Here is our parent caregiver screener that we give. Just an example. Okay, what special talents? We have everything in English and Spanish. And if we have a need to get in another language, we will. This checklist from the parent, for the parents or this caregiver is divided for our team in a different kind of way. The first cluster of documents, of indicators, excuse me, speak to general intellectual ability. The next ones speak to, I believe, critical thinking and problem solving. One set of them, they're all in clusters. So then another, and I can't remember what order we put them, but one cluster then speaks to specific subject aptitude. And then another one speaks to creativity and divergent thinking. So that we actually are looking to see if we have any patterns or any clusters in any of the indicators. So that's one of the things we've done is taken indicators from different checklists, from different people, from Renzulli, from lots of different people, and combined it. And so this is our parent or caregiver checklist, and it's in English and Spanish. Here is our portfolio document for how we score our portfolio. Again, we're scoring in the different areas. We're scoring for intellectual ability. We're looking at specific subject in any of these subject areas. We're looking at evidence for this right here is creative divergent thinking, and on the bottom is critical thinking problem solving. So what we've done with a lot of our documents is organize it in the different areas of giftedness that the state of New Mexico asked us to identify a gifted child in. So there's another example. Here is student interview questions. These are open field documents that our people use. So we'll put the student ID, the interviewer, the school, and the date. The interviewer could be the GAT liaison. It could be any teacher that has a good rapport with the student. We have required questions that we want to ask all students, and then the person doing the questions can then type the responses in as the child talks. Then we also have optional questions, and then we have questions that the GAT team might want asked before the student is questioned. So one step of our case study is we actually are interviewing each student separately. And these are modified from several different places, and you can see that they're cited on the documents. Here's an example of the student self-evaluation checklist. We have it in English and Spanish, and we also have it to where the student can respond, or we can ask the student and the teacher can put the response in for the student. It has a Likert on it. So these are just some examples I wanted to give you just so that you can see kind of the documents we're using and where we are. We were trying to do a lot of information in one place. I do want to tell you a little bit about the role of my team members. For instance, Mr. Diaz is our behavior specialist for special education. One reason he asked and became a member of our team is we've noticed a lot of gifted kids in our behavior classes. Or a lot of gifted kids being referred to behavior. So he said, I think I need to be a part of it. We have social workers on our team. And so that's why Mr. Diaz is there. Miss Leslie Harris and Miss Shauna Wilson, they're on the team. They're instructional specialists, Shauna Wilson for AT, especially assistive technology, for our resource and our academic skills classes, and also our gifted. Miss Lisa Aguilar is on our team. She's our newest member as far as our instructional specialist. When she first joined the team, she was our gifted advisory member because she's a high school gifted teacher. And once she became part of our district gifted advisory, she actually got her master's in gifted education and now has a master's in gifted and is now an instructional specialist in the special ed department. And so that's pretty cool. Mr. Melendez is here. He is our our chair of our district gifted advisory. So I just want to kind of reiterate that. And I know I kind of flew through it and it felt a little odd because I'm not teaching kids. I've been doing PD, staff development, but I'm a little unsure of myself on Zoom, so I don't know if that's clear. If you have questions, comments, anyone on my team would be happy to help answer.
So there are some questions that have come up in the chat. I'm going to scroll back a little bit. So there was a question about if you would be willing to share the folder with the documents that you all use. That question came from a couple of different people.
If people would like them, if they contact me, I will. I don't just want to make it open to the public because there's a lot of context for them. And if I make it open to the public, people may just use it and not understand what our intent is. So I'd be glad to share with anyone who contacts me or any member of the team. And we'd be glad to share what we're doing. I have to say we are still in progress. We still lack 1 day of training. We kind of got stalled by COVID. Just like with everybody else, when COVID hit, I had just gotten the job as gifted coordinator, but I had been the coordinator for special education prior to that. Because of COVID and because of staffing, we never got to hire a special education coordinator. So I'm actually coordinator now doing 2 coordinator jobs. And so what has happened with COVID and with all of the things as you all are going through, our gifted piece is a little bit on stall. We're getting ready to go back up. We've been talking to our different committee members. We've got a plan in place now. We're getting ready to go full tilt now that we're done with all of the things we needed to do with SPED for our disability kids, which I hate to do that, but that's the reality of the world. I'm in 2 positions right now. So we still have 1 more day of training, but I can tell you that the intense training, the GAT liaisons are emailing me, when are we starting? When are we starting? We're getting ready to start. One of the things we had to do was get our DIACs comfortable with remote assessment. That's been an issue. And it's an issue for everyone, I'm sure. So we're a little bit on stall, but I can give you a lot of really deep information that came out just during the 6 days of training we've had and the things we've been doing with gifted kids since COVID. But I'm very happy to share any paperwork with anyone.
Great. And your email was shared in the chat again so that people can contact you.
And that is my cell phone number. So anyone is welcome to do that. It's right there.
Great. A question came up. How did your teachers feel about starting the process with the amount of paperwork we already have? Was there pushback for having to do all of this? So I see it's been addressed a little bit in here from Lisa. That
I can give you a lot more.
Right.
Yeah.
That it did replace SAT paperwork. Yeah. So it was taking something off the plate in order to put something on.
So you're going to find this really interesting. When the proposal was accepted by PED, when they told us to go forward, and I took it to all our campus principals, I started with the elementary principals, I got dead silence. And first of all, except for the 3 principals that were on my district advisory, right? And first thing was, well, our teachers are too busy. We have other responsibilities. These other things come first. We've got testing, we've got this, we've got that. Can't you give a stipend? No, I can't. The district is a very poor district. I cannot give a stipend. Well, our teachers aren't going to want to do this. We think it's a good thing. We think we need to do it. You're absolutely right, but we can't get people to do it. Well, the director, who is very supportive of this, Mr. Rapinut, basically said, well, you have to choose a GAT liaison. They'll have to do it. So I can tell you the most eye-opening thing for me was our first GAT liaison training, the full day. I had teachers who are special ed certified, who work with our most disabled kids, with our autistic kids, with our life skills kids, who were suddenly the gifted liaisons for their campus. We do not have many teachers that have gifted certification in this district. Okay, so with 23 schools, 13,000 kids, we don't have a lot of expertise out there. That doesn't mean we can't fail to serve these kids. So when I first told the group, when we first met, I think I maybe had 2 elementary teachers. We haven't done it with secondary yet. I think I maybe had 2 elementary teachers who had been to my gifted training, maybe 3. And then I had 2 that were on our GAT, on our district advisory out of the 16, 17. Actually, I think we had more than that, didn't we, Lisa? Because schools sent more than 1 person. They were so interested in it. But what was so interesting is it's all in how you build your relationship. And one of the things we've been doing over the past 5 years that doesn't show up in this document is the relationship we've been building in the district about the importance of gifted and why we need to really improve things in the district. That's been, I can't tell you that part supersedes everything else. So we took it slowly. We took it deep. We have a school board member on board. We've got all this in place. So the ones that gave me the hardest, the struggle for them was our principals, because they didn't want to give the teachers one more thing. So when I first met, I thought, oh my. So one of the things that extended the training was we had so many people that didn't know about gifted, but they had something that I find people who do have preconceived notions about gifted and think they know about gifted have that nobody else has. They had a totally open mind. And I cannot tell you how honored and excited they were to be on the ground level of something. This has a lot of extra work for them. And you know what? They said, it's okay. This is important, because the training was very specific. And this training that I've given them, the first thing I had to do was show them why this was a need. And they saw that need. And they are really behind it. So if you have full-throated support from the people in the trenches, from the implementers, that's where you need it. It's okay that the principals are worrying about workload. That's their job, to look after all their teachers. But they did what we asked. They provided a willing person, and we are providing the training, and we are going to make these people our experts and our feet on the ground. They're it. So does that answer the question? And they are not daunted by the extra work, which surprises me. The diags are with the testing, because it used to be, just to give you a little, just to show you what's going on with us, our district used to have our FTAP testing through our psychologist. We were down to 2 psychologists last year. 1 retired. We couldn't find anyone willing to come to Gadsden to fill the position. And unfortunately, our only psychologist has passed away. And so if anyone in the state wants to be a psychologist, we desperately need one in Gadsden. But that's just to show you. So we didn't even have anyone trained. Our diags were not to do that. So for our diags, this is more work for them. They're not with it, but they're being very cooperative, and some of them are gung-ho. So did that answer the question? And we're past time, but I'll stay on for whoever wants to talk.
I think we've got, I may have missed my schedule. Hold on just a moment. We've got until 11:45, so we've got about 5 more minutes.
I was afraid I was past time.
I had a question, and it kind of ties in with what you're saying right now with the kind of once you have your liaisons and the training you've done, because some of your liaisons really haven't worked with gifted populations. Do those liaisons, is part of their job at their school level to kind of help their GE teachers figure out who to refer? Because like I see all the depth once referral happens, but I know
they are the
being stereotypical in who we refer is a problem.
They are the ones, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
And they are the ones that are leading the process, for example, for analyzing data. It's really interesting. When we did the case study analysis, we took some kids, and I got permission from some parents to use their students, and we took some kids who didn't qualify, and we took some kids that qualified immediately through the past processes, and then we took some kids that didn't qualify and did qualify, and we took those as our first ones to practice. I redacted all the names from all the information, and I created student subject names, and we analyzed them. And I can't tell you, just by doing that for a full day, what insight it gave us into how we've looked at it, because a couple people had actually been on IEP teams before and said, wow, this is far more thorough, and it's leading me to ask all more questions. And that led them to start wanting, they helped me revise these forms that you see, and they decided where we needed to put more stuff in. So I'm of the mindset it's better to do it slowly, thoroughly, and right than rush it just to get it out. And so I could just give you hours of conversations just came from that. And what we saw, we found some kids that didn't qualify through a traditional referral and then went through FTAP and qualified. We had some that went through FTAP and didn't qualify and went through traditional and did. I mean, it was just a whole mixed bag. And what we decided, the missing piece was, we're not looking at each of these students in relation to who they are, in relation to their community, and in relation to what they bring to the table. We're not looking at all of that. We're just using cutoff scores and data points as the beginning and end of everything. Even with all the richness, we were fixated on that. And this has really moved the needle and made us look very differently at these kids, which I find fascinating.
Nice. Another person asked, is there kind of, I think, envisioning what something would look like in their own district similar to this? How many files would a liaison expect to handle in a school year? Kind of looking at what's the workload.
Okay, so we don't have that exact. We have right now, we have estimates, and it really depends on the campuses. One of my concerns is I have 2 campuses that have 0 identified gifted. And those liaisons said, give me 15, we got to find these kids. So we really don't know that yet. I can guess, but I can't be sure. This I found amazing. This does not meet what we see across the nation. In our district, we have far more students identified as gifted in secondary than we do in elementary. And I think that is a lot of parental push to be able to accelerate. And usually across the nation, you see more identified in elementary than you do in secondary, new identifications. Well, we have it just the reverse in our district, which told our team that there's a lot of stuff going on and it's all connected. You can't look at identification if you're not looking at how you're going to provide a continuum of services. You can't look at a continuum of services and identification if you're not looking at what areas do we provide, are we supposed to provide. Everything is connected. And that's why it took us a couple years just to look at everything and decide, okay, we have all these problems, all these needs, where are we going to focus first? And it was a chicken and egg. And finally, we decided identification.
Right. And Lisa had pointed out in the chat, going right along with that, you know, with this process and kind of realizing where that disconnect was and identification was happening later, that this process is helping move identification earlier so these students aren't going so long without support and services they need. Excellent.
In my world, we would be doing child find with 3-year-olds with gifted in my world, but my world hasn't gotten there yet.
All right. That looks like it for questions from the chat.
Anyone from the team, do you all want to say anything? Leslie, Lisa, Andres, Humberto, Shauna, anyone want to share anything? Guys, this team is powerful, but they're very silent. They're the movers and the shakers. I'm the mouthpiece.
I would just say thank you for joining us, and it looks like, I mean, I'm reading the chat and hearing you all, and I'm excited that you guys are excited for the work we're doing, and hopefully we can continue to kind of partner and team up and do some really good work for our students in our state.
Yes, thank you all for being so willing to share.
Absolutely.
What's been some very in-depth work on your part.